And this is where I want to bring James into the picture, who is the executive director of Internews Earth Journalism Network, not only because he's also the author of a book, A Land on Fire, on the environment, so he's very savvy as far as the climate change challenges and the environment are concerned, but also because this identity of a journalist, which we are discussing this, we assume that there is a future for a journalist with a certain identity. When we were discussing this idea of the network, using the network, you had some critical points, which I think are very relevant at this point in the discussion. Can you share it with us?
Yeah, sure. Well, needless to say, we use network journalism. We like to use a lot of social media tools to help journalists, local journalists around the world, to cover environmental issues. But there is a problem with a lot of what we see on social media, on Web 2.0 sites, which is the issue is quality control. And especially if you're writing about climate change, many of you may have experienced this yourselves, is if you have, say, a comment section at the end of your story, you're quite likely to be flooded with comments from climate change skeptics, deniers, contrarians, whatever you want to call them, who do not necessarily report on the facts and may spread misinformation or even disinformation. So I think that the issue of quality control is a serious challenge for network journalism.
And why you are still in the business of fostering journalism?
Because we believe, of course, like I'm sure everyone in this room, that journalism still has a hugely important role to play in terms as a public service and in providing information, especially in the area of climate change.
And maybe this idea of the identity of a journalist then can also bring protection if you are part of this group, which is identified by a certain set of behaviors or rules or training. And then I move on that side again because I have my challengers sit in the front row. Wilfred, you help us come up with this idea of the network journalism. First of all, tell us who you are and why do you think it was important to move away from the gatekeeper concept, look at journalism, and especially within the context of climate change, which is such a complex challenge to explain to people.
It's quite a complicated question.
I know.
We're running the European...
You can ask help, look around you.
No, I'm the director of the European Journalism Center, so we've been looking at this issue quite a lot. For one thing, there's limited space in traditional media. The news is short, the newspapers have only so much space to devote to any complicated issues. They go for, as Ulrich said, they go for short stories, they go for conflict, drama, and winners and losers a lot. So covering more complex issues is quite difficult in the given traditional media framework, for one thing. What we did do is basically build a platform for bloggers to write about climate change. So all we did is give them a platform. We invited them once, about 100 people from about 60 countries. We invited them once, they could meet, and then we left it up to them to contribute to the network all the time. And so we came up with about 1,800 stories, about 5,000 postings and comments, and we had several 100,000 links on the Google for this. So the networked effect took effect rather immediately. And we've been following up this with another one on development issues, which again has been very successful. And we see this is the kind of stories that would not be enough space in traditional media to get that important space. So we're building platforms to allow people to communicate amongst themselves. And also what we see is there's this traditional line between journalists and non-journalists, and we see this blurring of the boundary there. And we see a lot of people who are activists, who are experts, geologists, mining experts, experts on climate change in a narrow sense, in a technical sense. All these people usually don't have a voice. They have to rely on mainstream media outlets or write scientific papers, but there's no middle ground. So what we do is actually just give them a platform where they can communicate. And the network effect is such that everybody learns a lot from everybody else. It's not this close group of journalists anymore who have limited space and time, as I said. So this is, I think, the way to go, to just allow people to publish on platforms, and we do it with a minimal amount of invasion or editorial control.
I have two questions there, if I were a chief editor, and I haven't asked how many editors or people with line responsibility are in the room. Cost-wise, is this like a very expensive operation?
No.
So if you had your boss saying, keep it tight, can you do it? And second, in your editor role, how much censorship or cleaning up you had to do with posting, because we heard the comment about this need for control.
I'm in a lucky position. I'm my own boss. So the money-wise, it is not so very expensive. The most expensive cost was for the first meeting. So we invited 80 people travel-wise to Copenhagen, actually, at the time. That was the major cost involved. And running it is done with minimal interference, and what we see also is a self-regulating network. So if you have some nasty comments, you will see 20, 30 people commenting on this and quickly telling this guy, you can't phrase it like this, change it around.
On percentage, how many times did you have to intervene?
1%, even below 1%. Maybe there's one nasty guy we had who kept on doing this until everybody else gave him hell. And one girl who was cheating on numbers, on traffic she had for her own stories. And then my IT guys obviously found out about this and told her to stop this. But for language or for indecency, it was negligible. 1 out of 500, maybe, something like that.
And do you accept advertising?
No, we don't need advertising. It's running as such. The cost is, as I said, limited. It costs around, let's say, 50,000 euro for a year. So that is not so much money to be found. And we have some partners within the European Commission that we talked into giving us some money. So it's always a question of how convincing you can be on money sources.
So on this panel, and I think even in the room, sorry, the one who is the commercial venture is actually Robert company. Robert, how do you deal with balancing between the public service message and the need to be a sustainable business, to have a revenue coming in so that your investors are not pulling the plug?
Right.